Paul Kagame is on the verge of re-election. Paul Kagame is expected to be re-elected as Rwanda goes to polls. And, the news coming out of is that he has over 90% of the vote. So technically he has won. And so the story goes, and this story comes from The Guardian. So people in Rwanda have gone to the polls for elections in which Paul Kagame is widely expected to extend his rule of the Central African country. And this is the fourth presidential election since more than 100,000 people, mostly members of the Tutsi ethnic minority, were killed in a genocide in the country 30 years ago. Kagame, who led the Rwanda Patriotic Rebel Group to defeat Hutu extremist forces and end the genocide, was elected president by parliament in 2000 after the resignation of Pastor Bizimungu. He had won more than 90% of the vote in the previous three elections since in 2003, 2010, and 2017. In this election, he faces the same opponents as in 2017, Frank Habineza of the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda and Philip Mapiyama, an independent candidate. Rwanda's National Electoral Commission disqualified 6 others, including vocal Kagame critics Victoria Ingabire, Dan Rigara, and Bernard Ugantanga, for various reasons. Kagame's campaign priorities have included security, stability, unity, and the economic development. We choose to rebuild ourselves and our country, which was destroyed by bad politics and irresponsible leaders, he said at a rally in northern Gakenka district on Thursday. And over to you, sir.
Okay, so this is basically a press release, and I think in one of the previous coverages of, I think it was last month, heading up to election, The Guardian, and also expressed, my serious disappointment with The Guardian, because The Guardian is much better than that. It normally offers, so for example, today, in our discussion, I was shocked by the Financial Times in giving a very sober analysis of the IMF and the consequences of its conditions in African countries. That type of article you typically would get from The Guardian. So The Guardian has given us a kind of article that I doubt even that The Economist would offer, but perhaps they would actually. So, for example, by saying he won 90% of the vote in 3 previous elections without elaborating and explaining that obviously he did because they were rigged elections. So you're endorsing a complete lie and falsehood. You're doing public relations on behalf of the government, which is very tragic for publication of The Guardian. But I assure you the reasons why they do that, because The Guardian, these are not naive people who have just come out of high school and are just practicing journalism for the first time. They know that to present a more wholesome report, they probably would not be allowed to come back to report from the country. So they've made that trade to produce essentially press releases to have the ability to return to report from the country. And of course, I'm not just saying this out of the blue. This was the experience of the BBC. When the BBC produced and broadcast the documentary Rwanda's Untold Story, which I think in a previous discussion I reminded people was never broadcast in the United States and was not promoted for long after the government, Kagame, accused the BBC of genocide denial and banned the BBC from reporting from Rwanda for some time. So the BBC has made amendments, and its amendments has been to rely more on press release type coverage. And the Guardian is emulating that same type of journalism and does not benefit the people of Rwanda in the long run. It does not. Because at some point there needs to be a transition. One person does not last forever. And what happens the day after? You see? And that's the problem. Now, if you have major media such as The Guardian, basically just reproducing the PR narrative, that is a problem. So to me, the major problem here is not so much what does happen in Rwanda, but it is the uncritical coverage that is regurgitated by The Guardian for the rest of the world. And I'm glad we have an opportunity to discuss it here so that our listeners, and if you're not familiar with the history, anybody who's listening to us, I strongly recommend if you Google the documentary, Rwanda's Untold Story, it will take you to Venmo, where you can see this documentary. It's less than an hour. You'll be able to see, and you'll understand the missing gaps in the Guardian article. The documentary will address those issues.